that if you were going to take out the carbon tax, you should replace it with something that is at least, if not more, effective.
Well, my friends, you know the old saying, the power to tax is the power to destroy. It's a shocking statement, but it's always true. And if you look at how the prosperity of our country has slowly fallen behind the Americans, I think a lot of it has to do with taxation, including the hidden tax of inflation. That is, the government printing so much money that effectively your money is devalued. I remind you that when Stephen Harper left office, Canadians were actually ahead of Americans in terms of per capita earning. If you can believe it, we were richer than the Americans. Now we're poorer than even the poorest state. These are heavy matters, but it's important we keep talking about them. And the guys who never stop fighting on this battle, you know who I'm talking about. One of our favorite guests, and certainly a fan favorite, is our friend Franco Terrazzano. He's the boss of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and unfortunately, he's very busy these days. Franco, it's a target-rich environment, but I think it means Canadians are sort of waking up to taxes, and they're like Atlas shrugged. They're going to sort of shake off all these little taxes, God willing. Hey, give me your thoughts on the recent days in this country. What's going on?
Well, look, I agree with you in the sense that Canadians are just so sick and tired of this big, bloated, bossy government looking for ever new ways to take more money from us so that they can waste our tax dollars largely on themselves, on fancy trips abroad, on giving corporate welfare to multinational corporations, or on hiring tens of thousands of extra bureaucrats, right? So Canadians are sick and tired. And one of the massive tax hikes that we have seen from the Trudeau Liberal government is this capital gains tax increase. Now, number one, it will wreak economic carnage on Canada. There's really no way else to look at it, right? There's this recent report from the C.D. Howe Institute, University of Calgary economist Jack Minch, who crunched the numbers, and the capital gains tax hike will result in 400,000 fewer Canadian jobs and blow a $90 billion hole in our economy. So this is a massive tax hike. It's going to make Canada way less competitive. And you know, Trudeau, he likes to claim that, oh, don't worry, folks, it's just going to hit the billionaires. No. This is a sucker punch to many ordinary Canadians. It'll hurt small businesses. It'll hurt doctors. It'll hurt people saving for the retirement. Mintz notes that this could impact like 1 million Canadians, half of whom earn under $117,000 annually.
Now, help me out, because is this the tax? I mean, there's so many taxes. We're being soaked in so many ways, but is this the tax that the CRA, the Canadian Revenue Agency, is going ahead and collecting at a new rate before it's actually been authorized by Parliament, or am I confusing that with another tax?
No, that's correct. This is the undemocratic.
It's not even passed by Parliament. It's just happening, and even though it hasn't been approved?
That's correct. The legislation hasn't even been brought into Parliament, let alone passed. Right? This is about as undemocratic of a tax hike as you can imagine, where you have unelected CRA bureaucrats that are going to be putting their grubby paws on Canadians' pockets. And to make matters even worse, like set aside just the economic damage of a capital gains tax hike. But this is an undemocratic tax hike, right? It has never been passed by Parliament, not to mention the fact that Parliament is now shut down until March the 24th. There's every indication that when Parliament resumes, there's going to be a non-confidence vote relatively quickly, and the government will fall and head into an election. So this legislation has never been passed. It will likely never be passed. And also, the party that's leaving in the polls, the Conservative Party under Pierre Poilievre, well, they have just come out and said that they would reverse the capital gains tax hike. So this legislation never passed, likely will never pass, and the party likely to form the next government says they're against it. So there's no other way to spin it, right? This is an undemocratic tax hike where unelected bureaucrats are taking more money from Canadians.
Yeah, I don't know if that's even legal. And you know, we all know that phrase, no taxation without representation, and that's a centuries-old concept. In fact, that was even part of the Boston Tea Party and the rebellion against the king. And in fact, if you've ever been to Washington, D.C., their license plate motto, I don't know if you know this, Franco, is no taxation without representation, because they're saying we're paying taxes in D.C., but we don't have a congressman or anything. It's an ancient kind of fairness. And, who allows a tax collector to collect more taxes if it has not been authorized by Parliament? I find that very unjust. Like, you can argue against the HST, you can argue against any particular policy, the carbon tax, but I suppose the final line of defense for those advocates would be, well, Parliament passed it. That's the will of the people in our system. If you don't like it, run against it. And there's some basic truth there. But if Parliament itself didn't even pass it, it just feels so achingly undemocratic. Boy, did you know anything about the legality of that? Like, is that, like, how did that even happen? Just is there even an executive order? Like, how does a tax collector collect taxes without Parliament's approval? I'm just lost here.
Well, stay tuned on whether or not this is legal. I don't want to be cute, but I just can't release anything until it's final. But let me just say that the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, we are going to use every tool in our toolbox to fight what the CRA is doing and what the government is doing. But, just to really add a point on how undemocratic this is, in 2021, the last federal election, the Liberals did not even run on a capital gains tax hike. Right? So not only has Parliament not passed legislation for this capital gains tax hike, but the Liberals in the last election, they ran on a lot of tax increases. Right. They never ran on a capital gains tax increase. So no way could you say that this is the will of the people. It absolutely is not. So now there's two reasons that this is going forward. Number one, pure bureaucratic overreach, to say the least. Right? Bureaucracy run amok, to say the least. But number two, this should be on our elected representatives, right? This is on the Liberal government, Liberal cabinet ministers, and Liberal MPs for not speaking out against this. In fact, all MPs should be speaking out against this, because what is going on is the government is essentially rubber stamping a tax hike. And when this happens, you got to throw up your hands and say, well, what's even the point of having members of Parliament if the government can just increase taxes without parliamentarians even having a vote? Like, this is a total crushing blow to our democracy and the fundamental idea of no taxation without representation. But folks, two other things here. Number one, why isn't the Liberal government stepping in on this? Well, besides the political aspect, the government is broke. It's more than $1 trillion in debt. They ran a $60 billion+ deficit last year. Like, just to put a point on that, like, this capital gains tax hike will take about $7 billion from Canadians this year. Well, the Trudeau government, the way it's spending, will blow through that cash in less than a week. Right? This government spending is so out of control. But number two, the reason why all Canadians have to come off the bench on this is because we can't let politicians or the government get away with this precedent. Right? They tried to take as much money from Canadians as they can, and we cannot let them get away with it.
Yeah, wow. Well, I was just looking at a poll by Ipsos that showed 43% of 18 to 34s would consider joining America if they could get their Canadian dollars at par with American. And I did some calculations looking at the crosstabs. 61% of Gen Z males would do that. And I'm thinking, why is that? I think it's in large part because how do you start a family if you can't buy a house? How do you get ahead when taxes are so high that and inflation is so bad? And I think that's a very sad thing. It's one thing for people well into the thick of life in their 40s, 50s, 60s to pay these taxes. But I truly believe that a big reason why young people would take Donald Trump up on his invitation to join America is because it's too tough for a young person to pay the bills in this country. It's a sad thing to say. I got one more question for you, though. In 10 weeks from now, we have another tax hike, don't we? On April Fool's Day, we've got another tax hike coming, don't we?
Sure do. Carbon tax. It's going up again, right? What probably the most unpopular tax in Canada. Canadians clearly oppose the carbon tax. Why? Because it makes the necessities of life more expensive, right? Canadians can't afford it. And it doesn't work to help the environment. Like, come on, Canada makes up 1.4% of global emissions. You're just talking about the United States. the largest economy in the world, our biggest trading partner, in many respects, our biggest ally, but also our biggest competitor, they don't have a carbon tax. Even the Biden administration didn't impose a carbon tax, right? Trump's not going to impose a carbon tax.
Right.
So, like, what are we doing here? The carbon tax is all economic pain without environmental gain. And what's happening April 1? A carbon tax increase. But Ezra, let me just point out a timeline here, right? Parliament shut down until March 24th. Yeah. We'll presumably have a new prime minister, the next Liberal leader, presumably, right? Well, in a couple days or a couple weeks after Parliament gets back, there's going to be non-confidence votes, and then April 1, carbon tax increase. So, a little pro tip to all the Liberal leadership hopefuls out there, do you really want to head to the polls immediately after hiking the carbon tax? Like, I'm not this political pundit. I don't pretend to be, but that doesn't sound like smart politics to me.
Well, I got one last question. I'm grateful for your time. Thank you for carving out some time from your schedule. Of course, Mark Carney, the former Bank of Canada governor, then Bank of England governor, I call him an oligarch. He's the boss of Brookfield, which is a huge asset management firm, and it does other things, and Bloomberg. Like, these are very big companies. He was a governor on the World Economic Forum. Like, he really is a master of the universe. And he's come back to Canada to do us the favor of leading us. And I've been following Mark Carney for some time. And I really think that his central idea, even when he was at the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, has been carbon budgets, carbon taxes, carbon markets. Like, it's all he talks about. He says he's part of Greta Thunberg's movement, which is crazy to say.
I would say I see myself as part of the social movement. I think those at the vanguard of the social movement might see me as being farther behind. And I've, absolutely full credit, and I do in the book, to Greta Thunberg, who I've had the pleasure of meeting several times, and who absolutely has catalyzed that movement, the youth movement, and also done something incredibly valuable. And this is embarrassing to admit, but I think we should admit it. And this is often true, by the way, in finance. Very obvious truths are not fully understood in the system. So what she hammered home was the carbon budget, how small it was, how rapidly it was being depleted. And we've moved in a few short years, in part because of her, from a world of ESG, sustainability, broader conversations around, as I say, sustainability, to a relentless focus on net zero. It's called the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero for a reason, because we've moved to the relentless logic of having to get emissions down consistent with the carbon budget. So in that regard, I'm part of that, and part of mapping what people want to the mechanisms, particularly in finance, in order to deliver it.
Yesterday, when he announced his run in, I think it was in Calgary, he was asked about the carbon tax. Can I play a clip of that for you? I'd like your reaction. I'm trying to understand. Here's a guy who for 20 years has been talking about carbon taxes. I'm trying to figure out what he meant yesterday. Take a look.
That if you were going to take out the carbon tax, you should replace it with something that is at least, if not more, effective. And by effective, it's not just having the same impact in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but it's making our companies more competitive, it's creating jobs, it's ensuring that Canadian households are made whole in terms of their finances. Because perception may be that it takes out more than the rebate provides, but reality is different. And Canadians will miss that money. So you need a comprehensive approach. You need a comprehensive plan, not just a soundbite that fits on a lectern. And that, again, is a difference between me and some others. I don't do a little leak. I don't do a soundbite. I do a comprehensive plan that addresses all the aspects, and you'll see that in the coming weeks.
I don't understand what that means. That sounds exactly what we have now. Trudeau giving this little carbon rebate. This is, Stéphane Dion in 2008 was talking about the green shift. I don't understand what he's saying, but if I was forced to say, Ezra, what do you think that means? I would say he's just going to rename the carbon tax.
Well, I have no idea what it was he was talking about there, to be honest. Like, that was about as clear as mud, like a total word salad. But you know what's so crazy about all of this, right? Because for Carney to win the Liberal leadership, he has to be the smart guy in the room, right? The guy with all the plans to save the economy. That's going to be his pitch to the Liberal membership. Well, if you're the smart guy, then shouldn't you have the answer to the most obvious question that he was going to face? Yeah. Are you going to keep the carbon tax, or are you going to scrap it? It's a yes or no answer, and it's an answer that he should have. And as you just heard by his response, he had no idea, or at least that's what he said to the Canadian public, right? But here's the thing. Canadians are against the carbon tax. Canadians are against all carbon taxes. So now you're starting to hear even Liberal politicians start to speak out against carbon taxes. Okay, well, two things. Number one, prove that you're against the carbon tax, because taxpayers have trust issues, and immediately call for the government to scrap the carbon tax. Don't wait after the next fight on April 1.
Oh, hi, it's Ezra Levant here in Toronto with an important message, because we need your help. Independent journalism in Canada is under attack. Government censors, big tech deplatformers, and the dying legacy media are all working together to maintain exclusive control on the information you receive. They don't want you to hear other voices like ours, and they really don't want you to be informed and to think for yourself. That's why the work we do here at Rebel News is so important. Our on-the-ground reporting, independent news shows, and special content you won't find anywhere else. It's all designed to give you trustworthy information and alternative viewpoints so you can decide for yourself. We don't get government money, and we are not owned by some big global conglomerate. We're funded by people just like you, so please support independent journalism and help us continue our work by subscribing and becoming a Rebel News Plus member today, right here on the page. Go to rebelnewsplus.com.